All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We have over 100 people logged on YouTube joining us this evening. That is very exciting. We are excited to be here. We are the Ridge High School Counseling Department. My name is Stephanie Smith. I'm the director of the department, and I have with me on the screen the most talented group of school counselors that exists at the high school. And we are fortunate to have them here tonight to lend their expertise and advice with the community as we are in one of the most exciting seasons of the year, the senior application season for colleges, and really just the planning time for whatever your post-secondary path may be. So on my screen here, I'll take a minute to introduce the team on the Hollywood Squares. We have Mrs. McGivney, Ms. Sweet, Ms. Hughes, Ms. Cahill, Ms. Wu, Mrs. Trainer, and Ms. Miraview. All right, so this evening we have prepared for you a presentation of information, and this was a pre-recorded presentation, so that way we can really release this to you, and then you can look back. We'll record the whole evening tonight, but you can look back and refer as a family to any of the information that we're sharing with you. So sit back, relax. Hopefully you're in the comfort of your own home and you can just receive this information tonight. And then any questions that you may have, you can submit them to collegeplanning@bernardsboe.com. At the conclusion of the presentation of information, that'll be about a half an hour tonight, what we'll do is we'll take your questions, so your live Q&A. So again, the way you submit the questions for live Q&A is collegeplanning@bernardsboe.com. Mrs. Trainer and I will monitor, and we'll take your questions, and the team here is prepared to answer anything that may be on your mind and to help you out as a family. So again, this information will be recorded, and at this time, and afterwards, we'll release this and put this on the website for you to view. But at this time, sit back, relax, and we will give you the information that we have prepared for you in presentation style. So I will go ahead and share my screen to do just that.
Good evening and welcome. This is Mrs. Kukuro. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us. Tonight we want to go over important information regarding the college application process for the class of 2022. The goal of this presentation is to walk you through the same steps we went over with your student during the first week of school. We know that this process can be overwhelming and it can be difficult to know where to start and how to keep track of all of the details. As a result, the counseling department has come up with a process that we have entitled the 10 Steps to Applying for College. We will go over each step tonight and hope that you will refer back to the steps as a guide in ensuring each part of the application process is completed properly. We have spent a great deal of time making this process as clear as possible, and our hope is that you feel more comfortable with what your student needs to accomplish by the end of this presentation. We also know that what we are about to present is a great deal of information to hear all at once. Please know that in addition to this presentation, we have created a comprehensive resource guide and many video tutorials that can help your student in completing the 10 steps correctly. These can be found on the main page of our School Counseling Department website. As we begin this planning season, we want to let you know that we are here to help and support your student through this process in whatever their post-secondary goals may be. We are excited to be alongside of them in this journey, and we look forward to working with them. While this presentation is mainly focused on college planning, we recognize and understand that that is not every student's path. Whether your child is considering a 2- or 4-year school, entering the military or workforce, attending a technical or vocational program, or even taking a gap year, we are here to help with those options too. Counselors can assist with interview preparation, resume building and editing, and the application process for vocational and technical schools. As counselors in this process, our role is very much focused on support and guidance throughout the entire application process. We are here to answer questions and provide whatever help is needed along the way. Each counselor will be meeting one-on-one with each student during this time for a senior meeting where we can address the individual needs of each student relative to their plans. As I mentioned earlier, we have many resources available within our post-secondary planning site that can be utilized by both students and parents. Again, that link can be found on the RHS School Counseling website. Now we are ready to talk about the process, so let's start with where to start. At this point, before steps 1 through 10 are addressed, your child needs to make sure that senior packets Part A and B have been turned into their counselor. Part A was due June 4th and Part B was due today, September 20th. A gentle nudge to turn these items in, if not already done so, would be greatly appreciated, as these documents are important communication tools between your student and their counselor and keeps everyone on the same page. Students have been instructed to check their counselor's Google Classroom to find these assignments and submit them that way. What is Part A and Part B? Part A is a series of questions for students and parents to answer that helps your child's counselor write a personalized letter of recommendation, and Part B helps your counselor be aware of the schools to which your student is applying and the deadlines being utilized so we can plan for their individual meeting and meet their deadlines. I now want to take a moment to go over a few of the basics of applying to college, and then we will transition to steps 1 through 10. There are various types of application policies that I'd like to review. Many schools have more than one application policy, and your child may decide which policy to use for each college. Let's start with the regular decision policy. This is an application process in which a student submits an application to an institution by a specified date and receives a decision within a reasonable and clearly stated period of time. A student may apply to other institutions without restrictions under this policy. Next is the early decision policy. This is a policy by which a student must apply to a college by November 1st or November 15th, and the college replies by December 15th or January 1st with a decision. If the student is accepted, he or she is obligated by contract to attend. Another early policy is the early action or early notification policy. This is a policy whereby a student will be notified of a college's decision within a set period of time, provided the application is received in the admissions office by a specific date. These dates tend to parallel those of early decision. If accepted, the student is not obligated to attend under this policy. Next is the single choice early action policy. This is a choice that is not binding upon a candidate, but prohibits a student from applying to any other college under an early action or early decision program. Next is the priority or preferred policy. Under this policy, the admissions office sets internal deadlines to gauge the number of its applicants and to give full scholarship consideration. Sometimes this may mean the college waives the application fee in order to attract more applicants. The final two policies are rolling admission and open admissions. Rolling admissions is used by a number of institutions to review applications on a rolling or continuing basis. Acceptance decisions are made shortly after completed applications are received. And finally, the open admissions policy. This is a policy of some colleges where they admit virtually all high school graduates with minimal attention to high school grades or admission test scores. Community colleges are an example of this. Now I want to talk about the three types of applications your child may use to apply to college. First is the common application. We encourage your child to use this application if their school uses it because Naviance links directly to this application when sending transcripts and other documents. This ensures that everything arrives to the right place at the right time. Next is the coalition application. There is only one school that uses only this application exclusively, and that is the University of Washington. If your child is applying to that school, they must use that application. Finally, there are university-specific applications whereby colleges have their own version of an application specific to their school. Your child may use a combination of these applications or all of the same, depending on which schools he or she applies to. Our department hopes
I think we're having a technical difficulty. I'm not sure if Ms. Smith might have lost her connection. So just be patient with us while she tries to log back in.
Thank you, Ms. Cahill. Can you hear me now? All right.
Tutorials linked with detailed instructions, which you guys can refer back to at any time. So the first step is going to be paying for your transcript fee. So your child has a $7 transcript fee that they'll have to log onto the school website to be able to pay. This $7 fee covers sending the transcripts to any of the schools that they apply to, the mid-year grades that are sent out halfway through the school year, as well as the final transcript for whatever school your student decides to enroll in. Any transcripts that need to be sent out for the NCAA or scholarships or other special programs are also included in this transcript fee. For our department to be able to send anything out, this fee does need to be paid first. There's a video tutorial which is linked below that you can watch to be able to see detailed instructions. Our next step is making sure students are logging into their Naviance account. Many of these things can only be done from the student account, so your child should make sure that they know how to log into this. Students should go in and update their Naviance account and move colleges listed and colleges I'm thinking about to their colleges I'm applying to list. Doing this will allow them to request transcripts, which we'll discuss in further detail later on in the presentation. For the next 3 steps, steps 3 through 5, these only need to be done if a student is utilizing the Common Application to apply to their colleges. If a student is using the Common Application to apply to schools, they should visit www.commonapp.org and make an account. Once they've created the account, they should start to enter information up to and including the education section. This is basic information that takes about 20 to 30 minutes to complete, and having this done will allow them to complete other steps, which we're going to go through during the rest of this presentation. The Common App has basic questions like how many students are in your graduation class, what is your GPA scale, and what is your counselor's phone number. Many of these answers can be found in the Applying to College section of our college planning website. The next step that students need to complete is the FERPA waiver in the Common Application. The FERPA waiver is a law that governs access to educational information. If your child waives the FERPA right, it means to the child's recommenders, the people that are writing their letters of recommendations, that they don't have access to the letter of recommendation. How do they complete this? First, they need to log into their Common Application account. They can follow our detailed directions, and this can only be done once the information up to and including the education section is complete. Students should consider waiving their FERPA right because it reassures colleges that the recommendation is candid and truthful. Colleges may disregard letters submitted on your child's behalf if they haven't waived their rights. One thing to note is that once they complete the FERPA waiver, they can't change their answer.
After they've completed the FERPA waiver, they'll be able to log into Naviance and match Naviance to their Common Application account. So any student who is utilizing Common Application to apply for a school needs to complete this. This is required so that any supporting documents like the letters of recommendations from teachers or transcripts can be sent electronically. Students can do this again after they have created that Common App account, once they've added schools to their Common App account, and they've completed that FERPA waiver. Students will complete this by going into Naviance and going to their Colleges I'm Applying To tab and clicking the Match Account button. Once they do that, they just need to follow the steps that they see. If this step isn't done, Naviance will not allow us to send your transcript or our letter of recommendation to the schools that you're applying to. Teachers also will not be able to send their letter if the matching process is not done for these Common Application schools. For teacher letters of recommendations, this is something that students should have already talked to their teachers about, but if they haven't yet, they should reach out to the teachers that they would like to write their letter of recommendation. Once your child knows a teacher is going to write their letter, what they should do is log on to Naviance and go to the colleges section where they'll find the teacher letters of recommendations link. Once there, they should choose the teacher that they're having write their letter from the drop-down menu, and then select if they're having the teacher send a letter to all of the schools they're applying to or just specific schools. A student will want to check the number of letters a school will accept to decide if they should only request a teacher send it to specific schools. For letters of recommendations, most are sent electronically, so a student does not need to request a teacher through Common App, since Naviance is being utilized to send those letters. And if they do have any specific questions, they can just let us know. Teachers will send their letters directly to colleges, and a student does not need to have their application complete and submitted to be able to put these teacher requests into Naviance. They can do this beforehand, and when a teacher is ready to send their letter, they will hit submit on Naviance. Lastly, just make sure you're giving your teacher enough time to write the letter and that you've completed any additional materials that they want from you, like a questionnaire about their class or anything else they might need. Now Ms. Cahill is going to take you through the rest of the steps that need to be completed.
Good evening. I'll pick up where Ms. Wu left off with step 7, which is for students to complete the Google form in the counselor's Google Classroom under the classwork section. This Google form is to signify to the counselor that the student is ready for their senior meeting because they have turned in both senior packets and completed steps 1 through 6. Once your child has submitted the Google form, their counselor will reach out to them to schedule their senior meeting. Students should be patient once they've submitted the form to allow time for the counselor to reach out and schedule the meeting. In step 8, we ask students to consider whether they would like to submit their standardized testing scores. The Ridge High School transcript does not include standardized test scores, and they're sent directly from College Board or ACT by logging into their online account. There is a fee for sending those scores to schools, $12 for the SAT per school and $13 per school for the ACT. On this slide, we go over some considerations for students related to standardized testing. For example, test optional schools. Some schools were test optional prior to COVID. Some schools have gone test optional as a result of COVID restrictions. For those schools, students can choose whether or not to submit their scores. It's important for them to check the website of each school that they're applying to before sending scores to decide whether or not that school is test optional and whether or not they would like to submit their scores. If they have questions about this, they can definitely talk to their counselor during their senior meeting. Some schools also allow self-reporting of standardized test scores and allow the students to add their scores as part of the application. Students should check to see if any of their schools have this policy before sending. If the student is done testing, they can go ahead and send their scores now unless they have questions related to what scores they want to send to what schools. We do not recommend rush reporting, as many schools do not accept rushed or priority reports, so it's important for them to allow ample time for scores to be delivered. If your child is still taking additional tests, each time they register for an SAT or an ACT, they have an opportunity to select up to 4 schools to send the scores for free, which is a great way to save money and also a faster process since they're sent when available. Students will have an opportunity to submit scores when available when they are taking testing, so that's something to consider if they're getting close to the deadline. AP scores are generally not part of the application process and usually are sent after your child commits to a particular school. In step 9, students need to request their transcripts. Transcript requests are made in the Student Naviance portal. Transcripts cannot be requested until your child has submitted senior packets Part A and B, paid the transcript fee, and had their individual senior meeting with their counselor. Some colleges do not require transcripts, but instead ask students to self-report their own courses and grades. That is something called an SRAR, or a self-reported academic record. Schools like Rutgers use this instead of requiring that students submit transcripts. So what your child needs to do is first determine if their school requires a transcript or a self-report. If they require a transcript, your student should go in and request the transcript in Naviance. We provide a video tutorial on this slide and to students in the Ridge High School Google site so that they can understand exactly how to request their transcripts. And if the school does not require a transcript, they should go ahead and follow the process to complete their SRAR. Step 10 is for your student to complete their applications. They should do so by the chosen deadline, and they should also make their payment at the time the application is submitted. They'll upload their essay as part of the application. They should not make their essay college specific other than for supplement questions, since the application will go to all schools. Some colleges do require supplement essays, and your child should plan enough time for writing those. For the early decision agreements, if your child is applying early decision, they do need to complete the ED agreement, and we provide them directions for doing so on our post-secondary planning site. For schools that are non-Common App schools, students may have a different process for completing the ED agreement, which may require a written signature from the counselor and the parent. If so, the student should go ahead and print out that form. They would sign it, the parent would sign it, and then they would bring it into the counselor for signature, and then it's the student's responsibility to go ahead and send it on their own. So what's next after your student has already submitted their college applications? First, counselors recommend that students monitor the status of their applications. By this, we mean that they should check the college portals to ensure receipt of all of their documents and that their file is ready for review. If a college does not have an application portal, the student should call the admissions office to ensure that their application is complete. If your child receives notification from a college that something is missing from the application, your child should first not panic and then directly communicate with that college to ensure that that document has actually not been received. It is possible that the school has the materials and just has simply not uploaded that particular document to their portal before emailing your child. If your child confirms that they are in fact missing that document or unable to access it, your child should communicate with their counselor, or if it's a teacher letter, with their teacher, so that way we can go ahead and resend that document directly to that school. When it comes to first marking period grades, Ridge automatically sends first marking period grades to each school to which your student has applied. If your child does not want to send those grades, they should complete the request to withhold marking period 1 grades from college's form. That form is linked here in this presentation, can also be found in the senior version of this presentation, and can also be found on the counseling department website. That form is due Monday, November 22nd by noon. Please know that some colleges still require us to send these grades even if your child has withheld them. And in those situations, we will still need to send first marking period grades to those particular schools. Mid-year reports are always required, and they're automatically sent for all colleges to which your child applies. No action is necessary on your child's part to make this happen. Mid-year reports are a combination of marking period 1 and marking period 2 grades averaged, and also a 7th semester recalculated GPA. Here are some additional reminders that are important to note during the application process. The first is about social media etiquette. We stress to your students that it's important that they use appropriate email addresses for college communications and that they check their accounts frequently. They should also assume that anything that they've posted on social media, Snapchat, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and also accepted student sites for those colleges can and will be seen by college admissions representatives. It's important that pictures and text messages are appropriate and reflective of a student who is seeking acceptance into a university. In terms of financial aid information, students should make sure that any financial aid applications are completed by the college's deadlines. The FAFSA must be completed to request need-based and merit-based financial aid. Even if a student may not qualify for need-based aid, if they'd like to be awarded merit-based aid, they must have a FAFSA on file. The CSS profile is required by some colleges in addition to the FAFSA, and there is a nominal fee to submit the CSS profile to colleges. It's important that the student follow the directions on the financial aid website for each of the schools to which they're applying to ensure that they have submitted all documents by the deadline. In addition, it may be helpful for you to attend the Financial Aid Night, which is co-hosted by Bernards High School and will take place this year in a virtual format on October 5th. The link can be found on the Counseling Department website on the college events flyer. Now, Mrs. Trainer is going to leave you with a few parting thoughts before we begin our question and answer session of this presentation. So what's next after your student has already submitted their college applications? First, counselors recommend that students monitor the status as the materials and just that form. The first reflective of a student may not. In addition, it may be
message to speak directly to live Q&A
session of this presentation.
Hi, this is Mrs. Trainer, and I'm excited to be our final presenter before we begin our live Q&A. So today we reviewed the 10 procedural steps your student needs to complete. We also feel it's important to speak directly to parents and guardians, as we know this process is filled with lots of different emotions. We want to share a very powerful message because we believe it's so important and also the perfect message to end this presentation. This is an excerpt from the book Where You Go Is Not Who You'll Be by Frank Bruni. Dear Matt, on the night before you receive your first college response, we wanted to let you know that we could not be any prouder of you than we are today. Whether or not you get accepted does not determine how proud we are of everything you have accomplished and the wonderful person you have become. That will not change based on what admissions officers decide about your future. We will celebrate with joy wherever you get accepted, and the happier you are with those responses, the happier we will be. But your worth as a person, a student, and our son is not diminished or influenced in the least by what these colleges have decided. If it does not go your way, you'll take a different route to get where you want. There is not a single college in this country that would not be lucky to have you, and you are capable of succeeding at any of them. We love you as deep as the ocean, as high as the sky, all the way around the world and back again, and to wherever you are headed, Mom and Dad.
All right, well, thank you so much to the team that put that together. Again, we will release the full recording of the video, and hopefully we can scrub out some of the technical glitches for you if you go back and watch this. Thank you for your patience through that. But that being said, obviously the counselors spent a lot of thoughtful time and consideration into describing for you some of the steps that we have outlined as you approach the college application season, as you're in the middle of it, to make sure that you're dotting your I's and crossing your T's. And so thank you again for everyone for that information, and Mrs. Trainer for your special message at the end there. So at this point, we are sure and certain that you have some questions. So again, the way to submit questions is to collegeplanning@bernardsboe.com. Thank you for those of you who have already done that. We will go ahead at this point and jump right into the Q&A. So we have some questions on deck. Mrs. Trainer, do you want to start us off?
Absolutely. So, Ms. Hughes, I'm going to ask you our first question. The first question we have is related to the checklist that we talked about. So can you just highlight again a little bit about what the checklist is, where it can be found, and when it has to be completed?
Sure. So the senior checklist is a Google form that we created this year. It is posted in each counselor's Google Classroom, and it must be completed before we have our senior meetings with the students. So once that's submitted through the Google Classroom, the counselor will reach out to the student directly to schedule a senior meeting during a time that works for both of them. And the checklist just ensures to us that the students have completed the first 6 steps of the process, the 6 steps that we had discussed previously in the presentation, and make sure that those technical pieces of the application are out of the way, so that when we meet for our senior meeting, we are able to focus on the questions that the students might have or bigger pieces of the process rather than those technical pieces that they're able to complete on their own. The checklist is also located on our new post-secondary planning site. So I think we are going to give a visual of that site.
Yeah, that's a good idea, Mrs. Hughes, because we made a lot of frequent mention of that site. And so for those of you who have had an opportunity to log on and explore the site, that's great. And for those of you who have not, we do want to give you just a brief visual. So I will go ahead and share my screen again. So this is the post-secondary planning site that the counselors have referenced several times. And so this is a resource center for you as a family. On the left-hand side of your screen, you can see that there are various topics in alphabetical order. And so if you are looking for something specific, such as documents or downloads, for instance, you can click on here and get some of the documents that you might need. If you're looking for application information to fill out your applications, there's a tab for that. There's really a lot of information here. And so we just want to give you, again, the visual so that you know what this looks like, you know how to access this. This is on our front page of our Bernards BOE site so that you have this as a reference.
Alrighty, I think I will. That site is just, we're all really so excited about it. So I'm glad we were able to show you a visual. It's just, as Ms. Smith said, it's really your go-to place with any questions any students have. We always want to encourage them to check out that site because there's just a wealth of information there. We're going to shift gears now to talk a little bit about testing. So Ms. Merrive, can you talk a little bit about what it means to be test optional? What does it mean to be test blind? And will a student be penalized for not submitting test scores?
So as was mentioned in the presentation, during the pandemic last year, the colleges moved to a test optional format to taking into consideration, the amount of availability there was for standardized testing. Many of those schools have continued providing test optional for students into this submission cycle. So if a college allows students to apply test optional, what they are saying is the student will not be penalized in any way at an advantage or disadvantage if they submit test scores or do not submit test scores. If the student chooses not to submit test scores, then there will be more weight and consideration given to other parts of the application. If a school is test blind, that means that the school is not going to be considering test scores whatsoever. So no test scores, whether or not you want to send them, will be considered as part of the admissions process. So the idea is to continue with allowing students the flexibility of applying to their universities with or without test scores, where the universities feel that based on how last year's admissions class went, they still have all the other information they need to select their class.
All right, thank you, Ms. Mirview. I think that's a really great explanation, of what those terms mean and, some of the, considerations to have around that. So a question here, just as a follow-up for you, how can my student determine whether or not they should apply test optional?
Okay, that's a great question. So if a school does offer test optional, there's a couple of things that we encourage the students to do. The first is you want to drill down into the numbers. So you want to look at your SAT score or your ACT score, and the student wants to see how their score fits into the mid 50% of the accepted students at that specific university. So you can find this information in two places. If you were to Google the name of a college like the University of Wisconsin, accepted student profile, oftentimes that phrasing will bring you right to the website on the admissions page where the colleges will post the statistics for the current freshman class that they've just enrolled. So that's one place where many colleges do provide that information. The second place definitely will be available at every school in the country. It's called the Common Data Set. And the Common Data Set is an institution's report. It's uniformed across all universities in the country. So again, if you put in the name of a college, Marist College, Common Data Set, it will bring you not necessarily to the admissions page, but to a different part of the university's website where they'll host for you even past Common Data Set reports. So this is going to be a statistical analysis of many different factors in terms of that university's admissions and their undergraduates, including a section which is section C. And in section C is where you can find the information about the admissions and applications for the most recent freshman year. So that's where you would find that mid 50% posted as well. And you'll also find other information there that gives context into the application pool for that class. Then the next place we encourage students to look, after you move away from the broader context of the university's mid 50% accepted student profile test scores, you then should look at Naviance, because Naviance with the scattergrams is going to show a student where they and their test score sits in the context of Ridge High School and how Ridge High School has done with that specific school. So in some instances, the student may be sitting right in the middle of where students in the past have been accepted, or above or below, depending on each school and each student's scores. So there's only 1 year worth of data right now in the scattergrams that would be reflecting the test optional. So that is last year's class. So I do think that the scattergrams are still a strong indicator of where your student's test score falls into where students in the past have been accepted, denied, or waitlisted and deferred. And then once the student has kind of drilled into both of those numbers, the broader context of the college, and then the more specific context of how Ridge High School students do at specific universities, then they can always consult with the counselor as well. And we'll help, guide them whether or not we think they should submit based on, current trends that we saw last year in our office.
Thank you. Ms. Cahill, we have an email question that is asking about letters of recommendation, if it's too late to ask for a letter of recommendation, and also how somebody from outside of Ridge would go about submitting their letter of recommendation. Is it emailed to the admissions office, or how is it submitted? If you could speak to that.
Sure. So I wouldn't say that it's too late to ask for letters of recommendation. What I would say is that students should be thoughtful about the fact that we did ask them to consider who they were going to ask last spring. And so if they are asking right now, to just be cognizant of the idea that it does give teachers a lot less time to write and submit their letters than had they asked in the spring. So it doesn't mean that they can't still ask, but I just would ask that they be thoughtful about the idea that they're asking rather late in the process. So just to give, the teachers as much of a heads up as they can, and I would thank them profusely for their willingness to write at this point. But I do understand that there could be reasons why a student might not have asked beforehand, or they might have asked someone who maybe is no longer at Ridge. And so therefore they might need to look for a new teacher at this point to write for them. in terms of how they would send recommendations from teachers that are outside of Ridge High School. So there's not necessarily an easy answer to that. I would probably suggest that that student ask their particular counselor about this. What we have said to some students is that if they're using the Common application, they could add an outside recommendation onto the Common application, but some schools do not accept outside recommenders. So it's something to be thoughtful about and decide how it's best to submit that, but that would be one option. Another option would be to submit directly to a school if that school either doesn't take Common application or if the student communicates with that college and they're willing to take the recommendation via email. So that's something that may be specific to the places that they're applying and something that is worth discussing during their senior meeting.
All right, a question here on admissions policies that we referenced earlier. So is there an advantage to submitting early rather than at the regular decision deadline?
Okay, I can take that one as well. So in terms of applying early decision, which is a commitment, right? When you apply early decision, you are committing to attending that school if you are admitted. So it is a commitment first and foremost. There is an element of strategy with that commitment. Again, if you drill into the numbers and you were to reference that same common data set report I talked about earlier, you will see that when a college offers early decision, so the binding agreement, the application pool is smaller than the regular decision pool. The acceptance rate is higher than the regular decision pool. And then oftentimes the college is looking to enroll 30 to 60% of the entire freshman class they want to matriculate in the fall. So if you do all those numbers and crunch them, you'll see how the statistics are in the favor of applying early decision. So it is a commitment, but when you look at the numbers, because the pool is smaller, the acceptance rate is higher, and colleges will sometimes fill half of their entire freshman class with early decision applicants, which means the other half of the class is going to be filled by the thousands of applicants in the regular pool. With that said, the commitment is huge because financial consideration has to be given that there's no guarantee what type of financial aid or merit scholarship the student will receive. You're committing to attending the university regardless of what your financial aid or merit scholarship package may be. So it's a decision that should not be, made lightly. Your counselors are all available to guide you through that, but there are numbers that will show how it can be advantageous in that regard. In terms of early action doesn't have as much in terms of like the size of the application pool, doesn't have as much influence there. But at many of the large state universities, they will say we're applying early action and priority. And once we review those students and admit students who apply regular decision or even rolling will be admitted as space allows. So with regards to early action and priority deadlines for large public schools specifically, it is in the student's best interest to see if their application will be ready for an early action deadline or a priority deadline. Because even if they are qualified, there may not be as much space in the regular or rolling decision pool. And then again, the notification, comes earlier, but there is no binding commitment there. And there are certainly, private schools who have early action as well. And previously, if a school had early action and not early decision, we would see, a more favorable advantage to early action. But with the introduction of many colleges adding the early decision, it eats into that early action pool. And so that's where the ED, appears to be more advantageous in terms of the statistics.
Thank you. In keeping with the early decision theme, Ms. Sweet, we have a question about early decision and early action and how that impacts financial aid.
So students who apply for early decision or early action may be asked to provide their financial information in the form of FAFSA or the CSS profile earlier than other regular decision counterparts in order for the school to provide a financial aid package that takes into account need and merit. Students who apply early will not be at a disadvantage in terms of the package created for them. However, students who do apply early decision will not be permitted to compare financial aid packages at other institutions because their admissions decision is binding.
All right, thanks, Ms. Sweet. So we're still on the early decision track here. Mrs. McGivney, how about we toss this one to you? The question is, with early decision, are you required to go to the school regardless of financial aid received?
This is a good question, and it kind of dovetails off of what Ms. Murphy was talking about a little bit earlier. Students who are applying early decision should be having pretty serious conversations with their parents regarding whether the school is affordable regardless of the financial aid package received. While a change in financial circumstance or situation is a rational excuse to be excused from an ED agreement, that process is pretty stressful, and it is best to ensure that financial issues do not prevent a student from attending if it can be avoided.
All right, thank you. We have a question to Ms. Hughes about early action. If you receive a positive answer from an early action application, how quickly do you need to decide whether or not you will be attending that school?
Yeah, so this is a really good question. Since early action isn't the same as early decision because it's not binding, students do have until May 1st to decide whether they're going to be going to an early action school that they were accepted to. But the one thing that we would recommend is if a student has already gotten answers from several schools and they've decided where they're going for those early action applications, we encourage them to communicate to schools that either they may not have heard from or that they were accepted to, and let them know that they won't be attending those schools so that they can allow other students who might still have their applications hanging out a chance at the spot that they had at that school. So if they won't be attending, it could be really helpful if they let the school know that as soon as they know.
All right, thanks, Ms. Hughes. So let's toss it back to Ms. Sweet. We have a question here about writing the essay. So essentially the question is, you know, we do make reference in our post-secondary planning site and also in our comprehensive handbook about this idea of speaking to challenges or hardships that students may have faced in their life. And we encourage students to essentially, you know, have a conversation with their counselor before sharing some of that. And, you know, the question is, why would we make that recommendation? What would be some of the reservations that students should consider when they're looking to speak to some of those hardships or challenges in their essay?
Okay, another very good question. So I think it's often easier to provide advice on topics to avoid than it is to provide advice on which topics students should use when applying. So for example, topics that are simply a reiteration of a student's resume should be avoided. Whether a student chooses to share personal information about hardships, illnesses, or etc., it is very specific to the particular student, and the considerations for doing so should also include how the information is being presented. Providing information to show growth or progress or highlight that a student is resilient may be a good reason to share this type of information. However, utilizing it as an excuse or providing information that may raise a concern as to whether a student is prepared for college study is a reason to consider not sharing or changing the way in which it is presented. So students are encouraged to consult with their counselors about these type of topics to discuss which way that they should be sharing this type of information.
Thank you, Ms. Sweet. So I'm going to take the next question only because I actually had a conversation with one of my seniors today about it. So the question asks if the packet that was turned in today, if the list of colleges, the final list of colleges is actually final. So the question is, no, it is not final. It's where your student is today. It can absolutely be changed. We can add to it. We could take anything off. The main point is that the student is in communication with the counselor. So if they decided to change something or want to discuss anything from what was discussed either at their meeting or the list that they turned in, it's just that they update their counselor as to where they're at. But it absolutely can be changed. It is not final. It's final as of today. Okay. Our next question is, actually, it's a really great question, and I'm going to give this one to Ms. Wu. Ms. Wu, does every part of the application have to arrive at the same time? The application, the counselor letter, the transcript, the teacher letter? Can you speak to that?
So I know this is a very nerve-wracking process because you do have so many things that are being sent to schools. So that is often a question that kids have, like, does everything need to go? Do I need to submit my application first before all these other pieces go? And the answer is that everything, there is no specific order that everything needs to go in. So what we do encourage students to do, and that's why we have them doing the checklist and making sure all those technical steps are done so that they have the teacher letters already requested to be sent to a school. They have it set up so the transcript and our letter of recommendation will go to a school. And we encourage students, if they are sending those test scores, to request that those are sent so that when they do get closer to that deadline and they're ready to submit their application and they hit submit, all those other pieces will come together on the college's side and complete their application file. So everything will be coming in at different times, and especially with those schools that are electronic, like Common App, everything is linked together once it's submitted. And it's the same with, you know, Coalition, or if schools use their own application, they have a file created with the student's name and birth date, and everything will come together. And that's why it's also important that students are checking those portals once the deadline has passed to ensure that all those documents have been submitted. And if they are missing anything, to communicate with us so that we can get those documents out to those schools.
All right, thank you, Ms. Wu. So how about Mrs. McGivney? Can you talk to us about starting the process of actually filling out the applications? What are the considerations we should have? Question here about target timelines for each of the different application types. So if you can just take a minute to kind of speak about that process of starting.
Sure. So really, the magic answer is starting whenever you feel like you feel like your son or daughter is ready to go. So there are a few different deadlines that we talked about a little bit earlier in the presentation. There is a pretty popular deadline of November 1st, which is the early action deadline. So basically, whenever your son or daughter is ready to start those applications and opening those portals, we recommend that they do so. The process can take a little bit of time, so giving them enough time and as much time as possible is certainly what we recommend. The rolling decision schools begin processing applications once the file is complete. So this is a little bit separate from the early action deadline. So students who are applying using this type of deadline should be aware that it's beneficial to submit those applications as soon as the student is ready to apply. For example, they have completed any testing, they've edited their essays are ready to go, and their application is submitted.
Thank you. Ms. Cahill, we have kind of like a two-part question related to college visits at Ridge High School. Maybe if you can give kind of like an overview of what that will look like, and also if it's recommended that students who've already visited the campus attend those visits at Ridge.
So college visits at Ridge High School can occur either virtually or in person, depending upon whether the college has designated that their rep will come in person. They all take place in the Media Center, whether they are in person or virtual. If it's a virtual visit, the student would bring their PC and log into the virtual visit in the Media Center. If it's an in-person visit, the college rep comes into the Media Center to speak directly with the students. These are really great opportunities for students to ask questions, either that they might not have thought of when they were at an original visit if they went to see the school, or maybe something that they generate on the spot based on something that the rep may have said. Sometimes, in fact, oftentimes the reps that are coming to Ridge High School are actually the reps that are reading that student's application, because they are the reps that are assigned to our region. So it would be beneficial for the student to consider coming to the Ridge High School visit, even if they have visited the campus prior. It's also just another opportunity to get maybe more information or a different perspective than they might have had when they visited, particularly since a lot of the visits that our students may have gone on in the last few months may have not been guided tours. They might have been seeing the campus without a guided tour, depending upon what the school had available for them at the time of their visit.
Thank you, Ms. Cahill. Ms. Hughes, we have a question regarding sending AP scores. When should they be sent, or are they to wait to send them till once you're accepted?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think this was referenced to the presentation earlier as well, that AP scores are generally not part of the application process unless the college says that they want to view them for any specific reason, like if they are wanting to view that in lieu of an SAT subject test or something of that nature. But otherwise, they're typically not part of the application process, and the student doesn't need to report them during their application. However, once they are accepted to a school and decide on where they're going to go, they would discuss then sending those AP scores to the school that they've decided to attend, and they are welcome to discuss that with their counselors once they've made that decision as well, so that we could help guide them with that.
All right, thanks, Ms. Hughes. So Ms. Cahill, we have a question here. For students who have already requested the letter of recommendation be written from one of their teachers, how can they keep tabs on that? So how do they make sure that the teacher actually did submit that letter of recommendation?
So one of the helpful things about us having Naviance is that there's actually a really easy way to check in Naviance. If students log into their student Naviance account and they go under colleges, and then they click applying to college and then letters of recommendation, it will actually show them the status of their teacher letter, whether it's still requested or whether it has in fact been submitted. If teachers are not sending through Naviance, then the student would be giving that teacher envelopes, and then the student could always check in with the teacher to see on what date the teacher mailed those envelopes.
Okay, great. Ms. Merriview, we have a question related to like college list, related to like how many schools should students apply to, and or can counselors help students with building their list, or do they get any input from their counselor?
That's a great question. So in the spring, every student had an individual meeting with their counselor, and at that meeting, the student worked, or the counselor worked with the student to understand the preferences of what the student may be looking for in a college or university. And so that was the first time that the counselor and the student worked together to develop the list. And then obviously as visits took place through the spring and the summer months and preferences change in terms of students, discovering, what they may be, really strongly looking for in an institution based on, their major or the setting and things like that. Then they can also talk to their counselor about that again in the senior meeting, especially if the student might feel that they need more targets or safeties on their list and it's not a balanced list. It's not uncommon for a student to come in and say, I know I have a lot of reaches on my list, but I'm concerned that maybe I don't have as many targets or safeties as I should. What might you recommend? And so the counselor will work with the student, based on what's already on the list, to recommend other schools that will help round out the list that have mirror characteristics and qualities that we think would be a good fit as we know the student as well as the colleges. In terms of how many schools students should apply to, there isn't a set number, but we would recommend 5 to 7 colleges or 7 to 10 colleges. I think that last year in the pandemic, We may have seen, more colleges because students were unsure, what we were going to see in terms of how many applicants the colleges were going to get with the test optional, being across the country. And then to break that down, we would maybe see 2 to 3 reaches, 3 to 4 targets, and 2 to 3 safeties. So kind of, how that will round out. And again, I do think that, we may see more reaches on a student's list in terms of dream schools and schools that, they're really interested in, but the selectivity may be high or low, I should say. And so that could always drive up the number. But typically, if we see a student who's applying to more than 10 colleges, we will ask, if they've done enough research, if they feel they've, done enough, online visits, or if they had a chance to visit, because that's usually, a little bit high when you're climbing over the 10 mark, and certainly upwards of that. It usually indicates that other things may be going on.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to take the next question. It's related to, for a student who is reporting SAT scores and they've taken multiple, do you have to report all SAT scores or only the ones they want to send? So this is another really popular question that we get often in the counseling office. And really, it's if the schools are allowing for score choice, College Board offers score choice, the students can choose what test dates, which scores they want to send. They just have to be careful to make sure that they have to check with their school that they're applying to if the school allows them to use score choice. But College Board does offer it. It's just really up to the school if they're allowing the students to use that score choice option.
All right, thanks, Ms. Trainer. We have a question here. What is the CSS profile? Ms. Sweet, you want to take that one?
Sure. So the CSS profile is a financial aid form that is used by certain colleges to make financial aid decisions. Generally, some of the smaller private colleges use this form. The financial aid information collected on this form is slightly different than what is provided on the FAFSA, which is the other financial aid form that is widely used. This includes any elements such as medical expenses, elementary school tuitions, or any other household expenses, and it allows the schools to utilize it to consider this information when coming up with a financial aid packet for the applicant. This is a nominal fee to submit the CSS profile, and there's a link on the College Board CSS profile so you can review more information about it.
Okay, Ms. Sweet, can you speak to merit-based scholarships, financial aid, and how students will find out about them?
Sure. In general, when a student applies to a college, they are automatically considered for merit-based scholarships. There also may be some scholarships listed under the financial aid on the college's website that you can apply for separately. In addition, there is a scholarship list on Naviance with a list of any scholarships that we've received through the counseling office. So those may be local or national scholarships, and those are put onto the Naviance scholarship list. So you can check there for more details of any other scholarships that are outside of the school.
All right, question here about the time frame of the senior meeting. So Ms. Mirabue just made reference to the senior meeting. So how about Ms. McGivney? You want to describe really what that is and that process and what that looks like this fall?
Definitely. So senior meetings are happening right now, and they will be over the next several weeks. Each counselor meets with every student in their caseload. This is roughly 55 to 60 students. And most students have a November 1st deadline. So, as we work through all of the students, we just ask that you be patient with, when we're scheduling and meeting with your students. During the senior meeting, we will review senior packet part B, so the schools that they have in their list, like Ms. Murphy said, whether they have enough target, safety, and reach or dream schools. We'll answer any questions that they might have. and just really tie up some of the loose ends that they have, before they're ready to actually go ahead and submit their applications. While we might not get to your students meeting for maybe a few weeks, we always ask, if you have questions in the meantime, for anything for clarification, that you reach out to us individually.
Thank you. Ms. Cahill, we have a question, a two-part question about how a student can best prepare for their meeting with their counselor. Like, what are the counselor's expectations, and is there opportunity for follow-up questions after that senior meeting?
Sure. So I would say the best way to prepare for your senior meeting is to come in with any questions that you currently have. And, just sort of be honest about where you are in the process. We have some students who are really ahead of the game. We have some students who are, kind of right in what we've provided them in terms of the steps. And then we have other students who are stuck. And I think it's really important to know where that student is when we are trying to help them, so that way we can do the best job at helping them through the process. So I think the most important thing is to come into the meeting and be really honest and genuine about where you are in the process so that we can help you. In terms of, is there a chance for follow-up questions? I mean, of course, I don't expect that if a student comes to my office that, they're going to have every question that they're going to have throughout the process. So, I expect to see follow-up questions, whether that is them popping in with a follow-up question, showing me something that maybe they have a question about in a specific application, or just emailing me about, some quick question that they might have that may be easily answered via email. So, we do allow the students to come down to the office and pop in. If we're there and our doors are open, they are welcome to come in. And if it's just easier to send an email because it's a quick question that can probably be answered that way, that's fine too. But yeah, I would say that all of us expect that there will be multiple questions throughout the process that are not just all going to happen during the senior meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Cahill. Ms. Hughes, we have a question about what should my student be doing after they submit their college application, and how does my student know if everything required has been received by the college?
Okay, so there are a couple of things that students can do once they've officially submitted everything as part of their application. They should definitely go ahead and check any portals that they're given. So some schools give students a portal login that's specific to that school that allows them to see the breakdown of each piece of their application and whether it's been received or not. So if a school offers that, students should be checking that to make sure that everything is in there. If a school doesn't offer that, or if they haven't gotten set up with the portal, then we encourage the student to either call or reach out to the admissions department and just double check that everything has been received on their behalf. And then if they receive a notification that anything is missing, not to panic. Sometimes that happens where the school might have just received it a day or two in advance and they haven't updated their website yet. So it's possible that that's the case. We just recommend reaching out to the school, and then if they're able to confirm that they are missing something, to let us know so that we can help get it to the school in a timely manner, but also just to make sure that it might not just be an oversight of that they received it and they just haven't uploaded it yet.
All right. Thanks, Ms. Hughes. Ms. Cahill, question for you here about the college essay. You want to talk to us a bit about that? What are colleges looking for in that essay, and what's the best way to prepare?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we touched a little bit earlier on, how to present information being very important. And so I always think that that is part of, what they're looking for. I think the most important thing that colleges are looking for is a genuine glimpse at who a student is. So, being who you are, being yourself, being real. If you're funny, it's okay to be funny. If that's not typically how you present, then it probably will sound forced if you try to do that in your college essay. I would shy away from topics that end up sounding more like it's about someone else than it's about you. So being careful when you're reading your essay over to make sure that you feel like the essay is truly about you and not about someone else who may have influenced you in some positive way. Not that that's not wonderful, but we really want to know more about the student. I know that Ms. Sweet mentioned the idea of like not reiterating your resume. So being careful to, let your activity section be your activity section and let your essay be your essay. And that should really be a personal glimpse into who the student is. I think that a lot of students try to come up with some sort of a topic that will be in some way like monumental, and they're 17 years old, so I think like understanding that like you may not have had that monumental or epiphany type moment in your life, so it's okay to not have an essay that sounds like that just sort of is about who you are, even if it's just something like years ago we had a Villanova rep tell us his favorite essay was a student who talked about how to make the perfect sandwich. It does not necessarily have to be something that sounds like it is earth-shattering. It might just be something interesting and something that gives you a glimpse of who that kid is.
Thank you. Ms. Merriview, we have a question related to identifying a safety, a target in a reach school using the data, even in Naviance. Should they be looking at the Naviance, the Ridge data, more of the national averages? If you could speak to like the data and identifying those types of schools.
So the first thing I would tell a student to do is to look and see where their profile, their academic profile, so their GPA and test score, if they're submitting a test score, where that fits into the accepted student profile for that university. And I referenced earlier where you can find that information. And then you want to look at the scattergrams. That's what we most heavily rely on. And we encourage students to look at not necessarily outliers on the scattergrams. We know it's often fun to say, who's that kid? How did they get in? And we have a good time, talking about that with you as well. But we really want to focus on what are the patterns that we see on the scattergram. So you will be represented on the scattergram, your student, with, a bright blue person, and that will be placed based on their GPA and their test score. And so you want to look to see, are they sitting where, in a heavy amount of green? And so you look to say, okay, you're right in the middle of the graph. You're surrounded by green. There are kids, maybe a little bit below you, a little bit above you, and then, certainly many more above perhaps, but that would look like a target, okay? If your student, if their bullseye is sitting, below where the green acceptances begin. And if you look at like where they're sitting, are they sitting, in a sea of red? Are they sitting, which would be denied students? Are they sitting, with students who are blue, who are deferred and then maybe waitlisted? So from where your student's bullseye is on the graph, between where you see the acceptances begin, what do you see in between that? And that can help you understand, is this a reach school, a statistical reach, right? So perhaps your student, doesn't have the coursework, which is where the, review is going to begin. Colleges are going to look at the transcript first to see what courses your student has taken and the grades they've earned. Or, does it look like it's green and red and blue, which means it's a reach because you're up against a very selective school in terms of the acceptance rate, but, there's a play there, right? So you're what they take, they're just not taking a lot. So how can, you work with your counselor to market your strengths, to increase your chances to, be in that acceptance. And then, for safety schools, either you're going to be sitting well above, where all the green acceptances are, or you're sitting in the green acceptances. And then when you look, they may be going, half a point below you in terms of acceptances as well. So the graphs that I think that are sometimes the hardest to make sense of is when a student is sitting in a pool that is red, green, and blue. So you're sitting right in the middle of it, but it's what we would call a very messy graph. And that could be a school where we know that the college really prefers students to apply early decision, or we know that the college reviews by school or major. So when you look at the graph, you of course don't know what major kids apply to, but that could be why some kids are getting in and others are not. So, that type of messy graph is not, a solid target or even a reach, but it's where that application style and the major that you're applying to can really have an impact on that. So there's a lot of data that we look at, to see like where do the trends begin? How deep into the Ridge High School classes have they been accepting our students? What kind of play from where you are What do we think you might need to overcome if there is a gap? Is it basically just transcript, or, are there other factors that are more subjective that we can work with you on?
Thank you. That was really helpful. We're going to switch gears and kind of go back to standardized testing. Ms. McGivney, we have a question related to super scoring, and will this exist this year due to COVID?
Any information about super scoring, you will be able to find on the college's website. We will most likely point you in this direction many times, as each college has a little bit of a different policy from the next. Some schools will super score, some won't. And there is even a situation where, in a select few cases, where they'll actually super score across tests. So that means taking the highest score from the ACT math and combining it with the highest score from the SAT verbal, for example. But you really want to go to the college's website to see what exactly their policy is about super scoring, even in COVID times.
All right, thank you, Mrs. McGivney. All right, how about Ms. Sweet? What about interviews? So do all colleges offer interviews? And how would my student go about signing up?
So it depends. Each school has a different approach to interviews. Some interviews are evaluative and some are just informative. The best way to know what the school is looking for is to find your admissions rep for our region off of the school's website and ask them what their interview process is. You can most likely set up an interview through the admissions office. So I would start by trying to find the rep to understand what the interviews are at your specific school.
Thank you. Ms. Merriview, we have a question about an activities resume and if that's accepted by all colleges.
So not every college will accept the actual activity resume document. You will know whether or not a college accepts it in one of two places. So in the Common App itself, when you go onto your My Colleges tab and you click on the name of a college, right below that college's name is the word questions. Embedded in the questions for that specific college is often a tab called activities. And so if the college will accept an uploaded resume, that is where you would upload your document to the actual application through the Common App. Then what we're seeing is some colleges, once the student has applied, all colleges will issue a username and password for a portal. So once a student has applied, the student checks their email. They should certainly look in their spam to see if it got trapped, but they'll get directions on how to open an account with the university admission portal. And that's where they'll be able to check if everything is there. So from that point, that's where they may have the option within the portal to actually upload a resume there. If the college does not allow a student to upload a resume, the students will be able to show the colleges their commitments through the activities section on the Common App itself, which is under the Common App tab within the Common Application account.
Thank you. Ms. Cahill, we have a question. If you could share, talk a little bit about the priority if schools value GPA over SAT and or ACT test scores.
Yeah, so I think probably the better question isn't necessarily the GPA, but maybe the transcript in its entirety, right? Because when we consider what the student's transcript looks like, it's not necessarily just the GPA, it's the courses that they've taken, how they've done in particular courses, maybe that even relate specifically to their major. So what I would focus on is the transcript as a whole versus the testing issue. So I think right now, specifically during the last admission cycle last year and also this year, that I think that we can pretty much confidently say that the transcript is of even more precedence than it probably was in the past. So I would have still said that 3+ years of a transcript is always going to be more important than 1 or 2 Saturdays of your life, or if you're really unlucky and not a good standardized test taker, 3 or 4 Saturdays of your life. But I think at this point, given the a lot of schools have gone test optional, that it's even more likely that the transcript is more valuable than the standardized testing. So that's not to say that if you have a strong standardized testing score that they're not going to look at it at all, but it's to say that, you know, certainly 3+ years worth of work and what you've chosen to take and how you've done in those courses is going to be valuable more than your performance on a singular test or, you know, a couple of tests. If you're based on what your GPA looks like or your transcript looks like versus your standardized testing, that's a really good, it's telling me my internet is, that's a really good thing to talk with your counselor about during your senior meeting, because it may be that for some schools, the discussion could be slightly different depending upon what the standardized testing looks like for like the accepted averages at those schools.
Thanks, Ms. Cahill. Okay, we have another question, Ms. Wu. The question is related to early decision 1 versus early decision 2.
Okay, so with early decision 1 and early decision 2, you can still, you know, in the beginning, only utilize one of those decision plans. So if you're applying early decision 1, you can't already submit, you know, an application for early decision 2. A lot of schools created the early decision 2 option because they realized that some students may not be ready in November to apply early decision by November 1st. So they provided that opportunity at a later date for students to do early decision 2, which is also a binding decision. So if students are admitted through early decision 2, they would be committed to going to that school. If a student applies early decision 1 and is deferred or denied from that school, they would then be able to apply early decision 2 to a school for that deadline if they're very interested in that school.
Thank you. Ms. Cahill, can you speak to a little bit about the scattergrams? We've gotten a couple of questions about the data and scattergrams, like how really to use them, even about the data when it's collected, if they can, like the range of the information that's provided.
Yeah, so the data that's in Naviance is specific to Ridge High School students. So that's why it may differ from information that parents or students may have seen when they went on a particular college visit, or if they look on College Board or the school's particular website. So basically what Naviance is really useful for is to compare yourself to other Ridge High School students, because you are compared to your peers that are coming out of your high school as well as potentially similar high schools. The data is collected. We actually have data from many years, but the data that you're going to see on the graphs is from approximately 5 years worth of collected data. It's the most recent 5 years, which is also super important in college admissions because things can change pretty significantly from year to year. Beyond the scattergrams, you can also see on Naviance as a student how many applications we've sent each year and how many students were accepted each year and how many actually went. So that's really helpful as well to see whether this is a school that you've had, you know, a lot of peers who have applied there before and whether or not we tend to have a pretty good rate of acceptance with those schools. So that can give you a pretty good idea of how to compare yourself. It's not the only information to use to compare yourself, but it is it's really helpful when you are considering how you compare to schools. The other thing to be thoughtful about is that if you are applying test optional, you're really only looking then at the GPA category. There's a lot of things. I know Ms. Marv, you mentioned before the idea that everyone really likes to look at the outliers, like how in the world did that person get into such and such a place, or, you know, wow, that person has incredibly high scores and wasn't accepted. there are other factors besides your GPA and your standardized testing that are considered in the application process. So there are certain things that may have stood out about a particular student. They might have a particular area of interest, a particularly interesting major. There could have been some other special talent that we don't know about, whether that was, you know, a recruited athlete or someone who played a particular instrument, could have been an actor or an actress, a singer, you know, someone who played a particular instrument. So it is something to consider that Naviance doesn't give you every bit of information. It sort of shows you the likelihood that you would be accepted at a particular school based upon your particular statistics. But again, you have to think about some of those other considerations when you're making those decisions about whether a school falls into a particular range for you. Usually safety schools are fairly easy to see. You're above what they're looking for, preferably in both GPA and standardized testing. Although again, if a school is test optional, that is no longer a consideration. When you're looking at a target school, you're looking at a school where you're at approximately the average accepted GPA. And then again, whether or not standardized testing comes into play is another question. And then when you're looking at a school that's a reach, I usually tell my students that there's such thing as a reach, and then there's a reach that requires a ladder. And so, you know, you kind of have to look at the graph and decide accordingly whether or not that's like your typical reach or whether that's one of the reaches that requires a ladder.
Thank you, Ms. Cahill. All right, I think we have time for one more question. So Ms. Merriview, I'm going to ask you, the question came in about senior meetings for students who are applying early decision. Should they request to have their meeting earlier? Or how to go about communicating that to their counselor?
Right. So, you know, that's where the checklist comes in. You know, we have the deadline of the 20th. So today, in terms of the senior packet part B, and I had a lot come in over the weekend with regards to the checklist. And so that checklist is what's going to trigger that senior meeting. And on the checklist, you know, we're asking students to indicate their earliest deadline. So if we see something like November 1st, we know that's the early decision. And so we'll work to get those students in because as a department, you know, we've never missed a deadline. There's such a great level of professionalism among all 8 of us. And we have such a great support staff to support the students with. So that checklist gives the student, you know, that additional opportunity to communicate with us. And when we see that come in, because we're all checking, you know, our Google Classrooms to see as those materials come in, you know, in every, you know, overnight in the morning, and then we'll schedule the appointments from there. But we do work with the kids, you know, based on those deadlines.
All right, thanks, Ms. Merriview. So in looking at the email address here and looking at the time, there are some questions that are rather specific to a specific student. And so what we will do is we will forward those questions to the particular school counselor for follow-up this week so that they will be in touch with you. Any other questions from here on out, definitely reach out to your school counselor. And this concludes our evening presentation tonight and our live Q&A. So I want to thank the team so much for taking the time. And I want to thank all of you for joining us, for taking the time out of your evenings to join us. And we're just excited to partner with you. We all love doing this work. I think, you know, that's evident in everything that was shared tonight. And so thank you again to the professional school counselors. And with that, we wish you a good evening.